Imagine for a moment that everything we've been taught about Earth's history is only the surface layer of a much deeper, hidden story. Our textbooks speak with confidence about timelines, eras, and the rise of civilization just a few thousand years ago. But what if the planet itself holds memories far older than our written records? Memories that have been buried, erased, or shattered by cataclysms. What if the Earth has seen not one but many rises and falls of intelligent beings before us? Their legacies lost to the silence of deep time. It's a thought that feels both unsettling and electrifying, because if it's true, it means we are not the first to ask questions, not the first to build, not the first to wonder what might come after. The deeper you look into the planet's past, the more you realize how much is unknown. Geological layers reveal moments when the Earth reset itself completely, mass extinctions that wiped out nearly all life, mysterious climate shifts, sudden spikes in carbon or isotopes that don't fit the normal patterns. Mainstream science often explains these as natural events, but there's always a haunting possibility. What if some of those markers are actually fingerprints of civilizations erased by disaster, swallowed by oceans, or ground into dust by shifting continents? If our own world collapsed today, how much would survive in 10,000 years or a million? Almost nothing. And that's the chilling realization: the silence of deep time doesn't mean nobody was there. It only means time doesn't keep their memory. That silence invites questions we can't ignore. Could ancient myths about golden ages, great floods, or sky gods be fragmented memories of real events? Are strange anomalies in ancient structures and artifacts evidence of knowledge that shouldn't have existed? Or are we just projecting our own imagination onto the past because we want to believe we're not alone in history? These are not questions with easy answers, but they are questions that push us to think bigger. They challenge us to confront the fragility of our own existence, to realize that survival is not guaranteed, and to see our civilization not as an endpoint, but as one more chapter in a much larger book. But here's where it gets even more compelling. The very fact that Earth forgets so easily makes the mystery stronger. If there were civilizations before us, they could have been wiped clean, leaving almost no trace. And if that's possible, then our own future hangs by the same thread, because time is not a patient keeper of stories, it's a ruthless eraser. The only question is, will we be forgotten too? When most people think about Earth's history, they imagine a neat linear timeline. The dinosaurs came first, then mammals, and eventually humans emerged as the pinnacle of evolution. But the deeper you dive into the geological record, the more that timeline starts to fracture. Our planet's past is not smooth, it's violent, chaotic, and filled with mysteries that suggest Earth has been through cycles of creation and destruction, far more extreme than we often realize. Each mass extinction, each sudden shift in climate, each strange anomaly in the fossil or sedimentary record raises a chilling possibility. Perhaps Earth's story is not one of steady progress, but of repeated resets, where everything that came before was wiped away and buried under layers of rock and ocean. One of the clearest examples of this fragility lies in the fossil record. We know that 99% of all species that ever lived on Earth are now extinct. That alone should stop us in our tracks. If life itself has been so thoroughly erased and forgotten, what chance does the fragile record of civilization have of surviving for millions of years? The dinosaurs ruled this planet for over 150 million years, yet in the grand scope of Earth's 4.5 billion year history, even they occupy only a fraction of time. And when they disappeared, whether by asteroid, volcanic eruption, or a combination of disasters, most of their existence was swallowed by the Earth. If a dominant species can vanish so completely, what about us? What about other intelligent beings, if they ever existed before? The idea becomes even more haunting when you examine the so-called Big Five mass extinction events. Each one was a reset button pressed on Earth's biosphere. The Permian-Triassic extinction event, about 22 million years ago, is perhaps the most terrifying example. Known as the Great Dying, it wiped out around 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. Imagine nearly all life on Earth erased, leaving only fragments to crawl back from the brink. If there were any advanced civilizations at that time, even ones capable of spaceflight, the scale of devastation would have reduced them to dust. The Earth doesn't care how advanced you are, it only cares about balance, and when that balance tips, survival is a lottery. Even the more recent extinction events, like the one that ended the reign of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, raise uncomfortable questions. We know that a massive asteroid impact near modern-day Mexico unleashed chaos that reshaped the planet, but alongside that explanation there are unexplained patterns, strange chemical deposits, sudden changes in climate, and rapid shifts in species dominance. Mainstream science points to natural causes, but if we're honest, much of the evidence is patchy, open to interpretation, and deeply vulnerable to time's erasure. And here's the unsettling thought. If humans were wiped out tomorrow, and a new species arose millions of years later, would they see the remnants of our world as clearly as we think we see the past? Or would our skyscrapers, satellites, and entire cities vanish into the same silence that now hides the details of ages gone by? Beyond extinctions, there are anomalies in Earth's strata that puzzle scientists even today. Mysterious spikes of carbon dioxide, unexplained isotopic ratios, and sudden warming or cooling periods have been recorded in ancient sediments. While many of these can be explained by natural processes, the possibility lingers that some anomalies might have less obvious origins. If advanced civilizations rose and fell in those distant times, what traces would they leave behind? Plastics would eventually degrade, metals would corrode, and even concrete would crumble. After millions of years, perhaps only chemical signatures in the soil or unexpected isotopes in rock layers would remain, and that's exactly what we sometimes find: enigmatic markers that don't neatly fit into the natural order. Another mystery is the sudden rise of complex life during the Cambrian explosion, around 541 million years ago. Life went from relatively simple organisms to a burst of complexity in a geologically short period. While evolutionary science has explanations for this leap, there are still unanswered questions about why it happened so suddenly, and why the fossil record before it is so sparse. Could we be missing chapters of Earth's history where life and perhaps intelligence emerged and was wiped away long before the Cambrian Revolution? The thought may sound like pure speculation, but when you consider how much has already been lost, it's less far-fetched than it seems. Even in relatively recent prehistory, there are signs that the past may not be as straightforward as we think. Sites like Göbekli Tepe, which date back over 11,000 years, challenge the traditional view of when humans became organized and capable of large-scale construction. While mainstream science acknowledges these as human achievements, the question remains: how much further back does the story go? If stone circles and massive monuments could be built at the end of the last ice age, could similar achievements have existed during earlier interglacial periods, only to be erased by rising seas, shifting continents, or catastrophic floods? And that brings us to another uncomfortable truth. Earth is relentless at erasing evidence. Plate tectonics recycle the crust every few 100 million years, dragging everything: fossils, cities, artifacts down into the mantle. Oceans rise and fall, burying coastlines and submerging entire landscapes. Wind, rain, and glaciers grind mountains into dust. Even if an advanced civilization once thrived millions of years ago, almost everything it built would be erased. The question then is not whether evidence exists, it's whether any of it could possibly survive long enough for us to find it. All of this combines into a picture of Earth's past that is far stranger, far more violent, and far more uncertain than we usually imagine. It is a past filled with resets, voids, and mysteries, where entire ages of life have come and gone without leaving a clear trace. If civilizations existed before us, they may have been lost in exactly this way: swallowed by extinction, buried by shifting continents, or erased by cataclysms so massive that even memory could not endure. And here's the chilling transition. If the Earth has reset itself so many times before, what makes us believe we are any different? What makes us think we are immune to the same silence that swallowed everything else? The truth is, we're not. And if we vanished tomorrow, the Earth would cover our tracks just as efficiently as it has covered every story that came before. When we talk about mysteries of the past, nothing captures the imagination quite like the massive stone-built monuments that still stand today. Reminders of human ingenuity, yes, but also puzzles that mainstream history often struggles to fully explain. These ancient structures, scattered across the globe, challenge our understanding of what early societies were capable of. They raise questions about lost knowledge, forgotten techniques, and perhaps even the possibility that humanity or something else was far more advanced in distant ages than we have been taught. The story of these monuments is not just about the stones themselves, but about what they represent: whispers of a time when the line between myth and history was far less clear. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza, for example. It has stood for over 4,500 years, yet even with modern tools and advanced engineering, replicating its precision would be a monumental challenge today. Each block weighs several tons, and there are millions of them, all cut and placed with astonishing accuracy. Mainstream explanations credit the ingenuity and labor of ancient Egyptians, but questions remain. How did they move such massive stones across miles of desert? How did they align the structure so perfectly with true north and celestial patterns? And perhaps most intriguingly, why do so many other ancient sites around the world show the same obsession with celestial alignments, tracking solstices, equinoxes, and stars with uncanny precision? Was this simply coincidence, or does it point to a shared legacy of knowledge that predates recorded history? Consider Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. This site, discovered in the 1990s, has been dated to around 11,000 years ago, thousands of years older than Stonehenge or the pyramids. The stone circles, carved pillars, and animal motifs found there suggest not only complex construction but also sophisticated cultural and spiritual practices. The problem is, according to traditional timelines, humans of that era were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers, incapable of such organized large-scale architecture. Göbekli Tepe forces us to reconsider the neat timeline of human development. Did humans advance much earlier than we thought, or was this site evidence of knowledge handed down from an even older, forgotten civilization? And Göbekli Tepe is not an isolated case. Around the world, similar anomalies exist. Structures that defy the level of technology supposedly available at the time. The ruins of Puma Punku in Bolivia, for instance, are famous for their precisely cut stone blocks, some weighing hundreds of tons fitted together like puzzle pieces with smooth, machine-like accuracy. The level of craftsmanship is so advanced that even modern engineers marvel at it, yet the site is said to have been built over 1,000 years ago by cultures without access to iron tools or wheels. How is this possible? Were they simply far more skilled than we give them credit for, or were they inheriting techniques from a lost source of knowledge? Then there's Stonehenge in England, whose massive stones were transported from over 150 miles away. Despite centuries of study, no one fully understands how ancient builders managed the logistics, let alone the astronomical alignments encoded within the monument. Similar megalithic sites in Malta, Karnak in France, and across the Mediterranean share the same themes: enormous stones, complex alignments, and little explanation for how or why they were constructed. One of the most compelling aspects of these sites is their global spread, from Easter Island's enigmatic Moai statues to the massive stone walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru. The pattern repeats: cultures separated by vast oceans and continents somehow built in similar styles, with similar obsessions for aligning their creations to the heavens. Mainstream history often chalks this up to coincidence, but the similarities are striking. Were these isolated cultures independently solving the same problems, or were they all drawing from a common, much older tradition? Legends from around the world seem to hint at the latter. The ancient Greeks spoke of Atlantis, a great civilization swallowed by the sea. Hindu texts describe Vimanas, flying machines piloted by advanced beings. Indigenous myths across the Americas speak of sky people, gods who descended to teach humans knowledge. Even the Bible contains echoes of a time when giants walked the earth and humanity was destroyed by a great flood. Could these myths be distant, distorted memories of real civilizations whose monuments are the only surviving fragment? Adding to the mystery, many of these structures display knowledge of mathematics and astronomy that seems shockingly advanced. The layout of the pyramids at Giza, for example, mirrors the stars of Orion's belt. The Mayan city of Chichen Itza was designed to create a serpent-shaped shadow during the equinox. Even more puzzling, many of these sites seem to encode knowledge about precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, something mainstream science only confirmed in modern times. How could ancient people, with no telescopes or modern instruments, have tracked such long-term celestial cycles? Unless, of course, they were inheriting knowledge from a much older source. But perhaps the most haunting question is this: what has been lost? For every Göbekli Tepe or Puma Punku that we've discovered, how many sites lie buried under oceans, deserts, or jungles? Sea levels were hundreds of feet lower during the last ice age, meaning entire coastal civilizations could now be underwater. Indeed, underwater ruins have been found off the coast of India, Japan, and the Bahamas, structures that suggest human presence, long before official history says it was possible. If these discoveries are just the tip of the iceberg, then the story of human civilization may stretch back far further than we dare admit. Critics argue that all these mysteries have rational explanations. They say ancient people had more ingenuity and resourcefulness than we give them credit for, and that with enough time and labor, anything is possible. That may be true in some cases, but it doesn't erase the patterns, the global similarities, the astronomical alignments, the inexplicable precision. When you add them together, it paints a picture that is difficult to ignore. And here's where the tension lies. Mainstream history prefers certainty, but the evidence of mysterious ancient structures demands curiosity. They remind us that the story of our past is far from complete, that there are chapters missing, and that perhaps humanity or another intelligence was building, creating, and aligning with the stars long before our textbooks are willing to admit. Which brings us to the next haunting thought. If these structures are the surviving fingerprints of something greater, what about the technologies that didn't survive? What about the knowledge, the machines, or even entire cities that may have been swept away by time? The stones may endure, but what about everything else? That question leads us directly into the next chapter of our journey, forgotten technologies. Because if the monuments we see today are confusing, what does that say about the tools and knowledge that once existed but left behind no stone markers at all? If the great stone monuments of the past are enough to spark questions, then what about the technologies that might have existed to make them possible? Stones can survive tens of thousands of years, but wood rots, metals corrode, and anything organic is eventually erased by Earth's endless cycle of decay and renewal. That means if civilizations before ours had technologies, whether crude or sophisticated, the odds of us finding direct evidence are slim, but that doesn't mean there aren't echoes, hints, and legends that suggest knowledge once existed which far outpaced what mainstream timelines allow. The possibility of forgotten technologies is one of the most fascinating and unsettling aspects of humanity's story, because if true, it means history is not simply a straight line of progress, but a cycle of advancement, collapse, and erasure. One of the most well-known legends of lost technology comes from ancient Greece, the myth of Atlantis. Plato wrote about a great civilization that supposedly possessed remarkable engineering, advanced navigation, and incredible wealth before being destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophe. Scholars argue over whether Plato was describing a real culture, an allegory, or pure invention, but the idea of a lost civilization with advanced technology has persisted for centuries. Even today, the myth of Atlantis fuels speculation about whether we are missing a chapter of history. Was it a metaphor for hubris and downfall, or a faint memory of an actual civilization whose knowledge was swept away by floodwaters and earthquakes? Beyond myth, there are physical anomalies that raise eyebrows. Take the Antikythera mechanism, a device pulled from a shipwreck off the coast of Greece often called the world's first computer. This intricate machine of gears and dials dates back over 2,000 years and was capable of predicting eclipses and tracking celestial movements with incredible precision. For decades, experts refused to believe something so advanced could have existed in the ancient world. Even now, its sophistication continues to challenge assumptions about the level of technological knowledge in antiquity. If a device like this could survive, how many others were lost to rust, decay, or the ocean floor? In India, ancient texts describe flying machines called vimanas, vehicles that supposedly soared through the skies powered by technologies we can't quite identify. While mainstream historians dismiss these as symbolic or poetic, others argue that the level of detail in these descriptions suggests something more. The texts describe specific types of propulsion, aerial battles, and even technical instructions that sound eerily like engineering manuals. Were these simply the products of vivid imagination, or were they cultural memories of technologies long forgotten? Consider also the engineering feats at sites like Pumapunku in Bolivia. The massive stone blocks found there, carved with precise right angles and interlocking joints, look as though they were cut with machine tools. Yet according to mainstream history, the people of the region lacked iron tools, let alone machinery. How, then, were these blocks shaped and fitted together so seamlessly? Even with modern saws and drills, replicating such accuracy in stone would be difficult. If forgotten technologies once existed, whether tools, machines, or methods, we may be staring at the remnants every time we look at these ancient sites. Egypt provides another mystery with its incredible temples and monuments. The columns of Karnak, the massive obelisks, And of course, the pyramids themselves all raise questions about quarrying and transportation techniques. Some researchers suggest that the Egyptians may have had knowledge of lost methods for softening stone or using sound vibrations to move heavy objects. These theories may sound far-fetched, but when you consider the sheer logistics of moving 100-ton blocks without wheels or modern cranes, they seem less impossible and more like hints at forgotten solutions. Even if these weren't advanced machines in the modern sense, they would still qualify as technologies, practical applications of knowledge that we no longer understand. Another intriguing piece of the puzzle is the Baghdad battery, a set of clay jars dating back over 2,000 years, each containing copper and iron components. When filled with an acidic liquid, they can produce a small electric charge. Mainstream scholars suggest they were used for simple electroplating, but others speculate they could represent a much older understanding of electricity. Imagine if entire technologies were developed around such discoveries, lighting, communication, or even medical uses, only to be erased by war, collapse, or time. The fragments we find may be mere shadows of a far broader spectrum of knowledge. There's also the issue of global myths, describing incredible weapons. In Hindu epics like the Mahabharata, there are descriptions of weapons so powerful they could incinerate entire cities, leaving survivors with hair and nails falling out. A description eerily similar to radiation sickness. Of course, these could be metaphors for divine power, but the parallels are striking. If advanced technologies once existed, perhaps their echoes have been preserved in myth, disguised as stories of gods and heroes. And then we come to the question of what doesn't survive. Imagine if our own civilization collapsed tomorrow. In a few thousand years, how much would remain? Our glass skyscrapers would shatter, our steel bridges would rust, our electronics would crumble into dust, plastics might linger in the sediment, but even they would eventually degrade. In a million years, almost nothing of us would be recognizable. The only things likely to survive would be geological markers, strange chemical residues, spikes in carbon dioxide, traces of radiation from nuclear activity. In other words, if a civilization had existed millions of years ago, we wouldn't find their cars, their phones, or their airplanes. We might only find puzzling anomalies in the geological record. And isn't that exactly what we sometimes see? Sudden unexplained chemical shifts, isotopes where they shouldn't be, layers of sediment that defy normal explanation. Critics argue that all these mysteries can be explained by human ingenuity, natural processes, or misinterpretation, and in some cases, that's likely true. But when you combine the myths, the anomalies, the unexplained engineering feats, and the fact that Earth is a ruthless eraser of history, the possibility of forgotten technologies becomes harder to dismiss. If advanced tools, machines, or even entire industries once existed, they may have been obliterated, leaving behind only faint shadows in stone, legend, and geology. What's most unsettling is how fragile knowledge truly is. A single disaster can wipe out centuries of progress. Libraries can burn as they did in Alexandria. Cities can be swallowed by oceans, as coastal settlements likely were at the end of the Ice Age. Entire cultures can vanish, leaving only their ruins. If it happened to others before us, why should we believe it couldn't happen again? The possibility of forgotten technologies forces us to confront a haunting truth. Progress is not inevitable. Civilizations rise, but they also fall, and when they do, their greatest achievements often vanish with them. The monuments we see may be the rare exceptions, stone echoes of a far larger story that time has nearly erased. And this leads us into an even deeper question. If civilizations before us may have mastered technologies we can only guess at, could their final downfall have come from the same source? Did their knowledge save them, or destroy them? And if so, what warnings are buried in their forgotten legacy? That thought sets the stage for the next chapter, the geological fingerprints civilizations leave behind. Because while technologies vanish, Earth itself records scars, and those scars may hold the most important clues of all. When we think of history, we often picture books, scrolls, ruins, and artifacts. But the oldest, most unyielding history book is written in the Earth itself. Layers of rock, ice cores, sediments at the bottom of the ocean, all of these hold a record of events that go back millions of years. Volcanoes, asteroid strikes, mass extinctions, and dramatic climate shifts are all etched into this natural archive. But what if civilizations leave their own marks too? And more importantly, What if some of those marks already exist in ways we haven't fully understood? If an advanced civilization had risen and fallen millions of years ago, their fingerprints wouldn't be found in intact cities or machinery, but in subtle, sometimes cryptic geological clues. This is where the search gets both fascinating and chilling. One of the first places to look is in the sudden and dramatic changes in the carbon record. When humans began burning fossil fuels at massive scale during the Industrial Revolution, it altered the chemical balance of the atmosphere and oceans. The increase in carbon dioxide levels, along with spikes in other greenhouse gases, is now permanently recorded in ice cores and sediments. Future geologists millions of years from now would see this unmistakable signal and know something unusual had happened. So the question naturally arises, have similar signals ever appeared in Earth's past? Signals that could suggest industrial activity by a forgotten civilization. Interestingly, there are anomalies in the geological record where sudden and unexplained carbon spikes appear, unconnected to known volcanic events or asteroid strikes. Could these be remnants of ancient industry, long buried beneath the sediment of time? Another clue comes from isotopes, the different forms of elements that can signal unnatural activity. For example, our nuclear weapons and reactors produce unique isotopic ratios that don't naturally occur. If an ancient civilization had experimented with nuclear energy, it might have left behind traces of unusual isotopes buried in the rocks. And indeed, there are mysterious anomalies. In Gabon, Africa, geologists discovered what appeared to be natural nuclear reactors in uranium deposits that had hardened fission reactions nearly 2 billion years ago. The official explanation is that this was a rare natural phenomenon, a perfect alignment of conditions that allowed sustained nuclear reactions to occur without human intervention. But skeptics wonder, could this have been a byproduct of something else? Evidence of technological activity so ancient it has been reclassified as natural because the alternative was unthinkable. Heavy metals also provide tantalizing hints. Industrial societies produce massive amounts of metals like lead, chromium, and mercury, much of which ends up in the soil and water. These residues can last for millions of years, preserved in sediment layers. When scientists analyze ancient deposits, they sometimes find concentrations of such elements that don't quite align with what natural processes alone should have created. For example, certain spikes in heavy metal levels in the fossil record suggest bursts of activity that are difficult to fully explain. Were they purely volcanic in origin, or did they represent something else? Perhaps industrial output on a scale we cannot imagine from an ancient lost society. Plastics are another fingerprint that humanity has now scattered across the globe. Our oceans, rivers, and soils are saturated with microplastics, and future geologists will undoubtedly find these synthetic particles embedded in sediment layers for millions of years to come. If we imagine an ancient civilization that had reached a level of synthetic production similar to ours, could they too have left behind traces of polymers, or strange composites now long degraded, but detectable in odd chemical residues? While plastics themselves may eventually break down, the strange chemical compounds they leave behind could serve as ghostly echoes of technologies once used by beings who walked this earth long before us. Mass extinctions also provide fertile ground for speculation. The extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period is widely attributed to a massive asteroid impact. The Permian extinction before that wiped out most of Earth's species, and is linked to volcanic activity in Siberia, but there are other, smaller extinction events that remain mysterious. Could some of these die-offs have been triggered not by natural catastrophes, but by the activities of intelligent beings? Imagine a society that altered the climate too drastically, poisoned ecosystems with unchecked industry, or even waged wars using technologies that destabilized the biosphere. To us, these events look like abrupt changes in fossil diversity. To them, they might have been the end of everything they knew. Then there are the so-called technofossils. These are materials created only by intelligent societies, things like concrete, alloys, or processed minerals. In our world, concrete is everywhere, and its chemical signature will remain detectable for tens of millions of years. If an ancient civilization had created something similar, perhaps their own version of concrete or composite materials, the traces might still exist, hiding in plain sight as puzzling geological formations. Could some of the unusual mineral deposits we've written off as natural be remnants of synthetic materials left behind by builders from another age? Ocean sediments, in particular, act like a time capsule. Every year, dust particles and remains drift down and settle on the ocean floor, preserving a near-continuous record of Earth's environmental history. Scientists studying these sediments have found layers with odd chemical ratios, mysterious substances, and sudden shifts in conditions that remain unexplained. Could some of these anomalies be industrial byproducts washed into the seas millions of years ago? If so, the ocean floors could be holding the silent testimony of civilizations erased from memory, waiting only for us to recognize what we're truly looking at. The challenge, of course, is that Earth is a relentless recycler. The crust is constantly moving, eroding, subducting, and reforming. Whole continents vanish into the mantle, taking with them any evidence of what once stood on their surface. Over millions of years, this process destroys nearly everything. This makes it plausible that even if entire civilizations had once flourished, their physical remains could be ground into dust and swallowed by time. The only real survivors would be these subtle geological fingerprints, anomalies in carbon, isotopes, metals, and sediments, and unless we are prepared to interpret them through the lens of lost civilizations, we will continue labeling them as natural oddities. This brings us to perhaps the most unsettling realization. If we are not the first, then we too will eventually become part of this cycle. Our skyscrapers will collapse, our satellites will fall, our data will vanish. What will remain of us millions of years from now may be a thin plastic-rich layer in the geological record, maybe isotopes from nuclear power and weapons, maybe traces of concrete fused into new kinds of rock. To whatever comes after us, these will be our fingerprints, cryptic clues that a species once tried to master the Earth and left behind scars in stone and soil. So the question is no longer just about whether ancient civilizations left geological fingerprints. It's also about recognizing that we ourselves are leaving them right now. And when we view our own impact on the Earth through this perspective, the parallels are haunting. Because if we are capable of altering the planet in ways that will echo for millions of years, what stops us from imagining that others may have already done the same, long before we arrived? And if that's true, the next mystery becomes even more pressing. What exactly caused their downfall? Was it the same destructive streak we now see in ourselves? Or was it something even more unimaginable? The geological record hints at strange scars, but it cannot yet tell us the full story. When we look back at Earth's deep history, the story of life is written in cycles of flourishing and annihilation. Entire ecosystems have risen to dominance only to be erased in sudden bursts of destruction. Mass extinctions are among the most mysterious and terrifying chapters in this chronicle, reshaping the trajectory of life and opening the door for new rulers of the planet. The Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago is the most famous, often attributed to a colossal asteroid impact. But this event was only one in a series of cataclysmic die-offs. The Permian-Triassic extinction around 252 million years ago eliminated over 90% of species, the greatest mass extinction of all time, and smaller but still devastating events punctuate the fossil record. The usual explanations include volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, shifts in ocean currents, and runaway climate change. Yet beneath these natural causes lies an unsettling question. Could some extinctions also have been triggered by intelligent civilizations that rose and fell before us? Civilizations, by their nature, consume resources and transform environments. Our own society demonstrates how rapidly this can spiral into ecological imbalance. In just a few centuries, we have raised carbon dioxide levels to heights not seen in millions of years, disrupted ecosystems on a global scale, and triggered what many scientists now call the sixth mass extinction. If our impact is already visible, then it is reasonable to wonder whether earlier civilizations might have altered their own worlds so profoundly that the biosphere collapsed around them. What looks to us like sudden and inexplicable die-offs in the fossil record could in fact be the indirect footprints of civilizations that exhausted their resources, poisoned their environment, or pushed their ecosystems past the point of recovery. Consider the mystery of the Paleocene thermal maximum (PATM), a sudden global warming event about 56 million years ago. During this period, temperatures skyrocketed, ocean chemistry shifted dramatically, and many species disappeared while others migrated. The leading theories blame massive releases of methane hydrates or volcanic activity, but the exact cause remains elusive. Some researchers have asked whether it might represent the carbon footprint of an industrial civilization long gone. The idea is speculative, but the parallels are striking. A sudden spike in greenhouse gases, rapid climate change, and widespread ecological disruption. Could the PATM be evidence not of random natural forces, but of industrial activity so ancient that it has been written off as geologic mystery? Another intriguing case lies in the so-called Great Oxidation Event about 2.4 billion years ago, when oxygen levels in Earth's atmosphere suddenly spiked. Officially, it is attributed to cyanobacteria developing photosynthesis and releasing oxygen as waste, but there are debates about the speed and nature of the change, with some anomalies hinting at sudden accelerations inconsistent with slow biological processes alone. While mainstream science attributes this entirely to microbial life, some alternative thinkers have dared to wonder, could a civilization have played a role in altering atmospheric chemistry at such an early stage, only to vanish without leaving a trace? The collapse of civilizations also leaves lessons encoded in myths and stories. In nearly every culture there are legends of great floods, fire from the sky, or eras of golden prosperity followed by destruction. While some of these may simply be allegories or retellings of natural disasters, it's worth asking whether they echo deeper truths. If advanced societies once existed, perhaps their collapse became the foundation for myths that later humans inherited. Flood myths, for example, are nearly universal, from Mesopotamian stories of Gilgamesh to the biblical tale of Noah and even legends among Native American and Pacific Islander cultures. Could these be cultural memories of cataclysms triggered by environmental collapse, whether natural or human-made? What makes this idea even more plausible is our own fragility. Civilizations, no matter how advanced, are far more vulnerable than they seem. Consider our modern dependence on fragile global supply chains, energy networks, and digital infrastructure. A disruption to any of these systems, whether by climate catastrophe, nuclear war, or resource depletion, could unravel everything within decades. If this is true for us, why would it not have been true for others? An ancient civilization might have reached technological heights, only to crumble under its own weight. When the collapse came, whether gradual or sudden, the natural world would reclaim its space. Forests would swallow cities, oceans would drown coastlines, and mountains would erode their monuments to dust. Millions of years later, only subtle traces in geology would remain, leaving future species to debate whether they ever existed at all. Another angle to consider is war and conflict. Our species has already demonstrated the capacity for self-destruction on an unimaginable scale. Nuclear weapons, if unleashed, would not only devastate human civilization, but also leave behind radioactive isotopes detectable millions of years into the future. If earlier civilizations had similar destructive technologies, they too might have obliterated themselves in conflicts that left behind extinction-level consequences. Such wars would not merely destroy their societies, they could also cause ecological collapse, wiping out countless other species in the process. When we study sudden die-offs in the fossil record, we typically look for asteroids or volcanoes. But what if some of those mysteries were the echoes of wars fought by civilizations now erased from memory? The collapse of ecosystems under pressure from intelligent beings is also supported by smaller-scale examples in human history. Consider Easter Island, where the once thriving society collapsed after deforestation and overuse of resources, or the Mayan civilization, whose decline is thought to have been accelerated by droughts compounded by agricultural practices that exhausted the land. These examples show how quickly environmental stress can topple even sophisticated societies. If this has happened repeatedly in human history, it becomes easier to imagine that it might also have occurred in deeper time with civilizations we no longer remember. The unsettling truth is that collapse may not even leave a clear smoking gun. Once a civilization falls, scavengers reclaim their materials, structures crumble, and within a few thousand years nearly all physical traces are gone. Over millions of years, geology erases almost everything. What remains is often ambiguous: sudden shifts in carbon levels, mysterious isotope signatures, or unexplained extinctions. These are precisely the kinds of clues we already see in Earth's record, but instead of interpreting them as signs of intelligence, we instinctively turn to natural explanations, because the alternative challenges our deepest assumptions about history and uniqueness. And this brings us back to the present. We stand at a crossroads where our actions are already driving extinction at an alarming rate. Species vanish daily, habitats are destroyed, and ecosystems are destabilized. In many ways, we are already writing the opening chapters of a new mass extinction. If our trajectory continues, the Earth's record will show a sudden collapse of biodiversity coinciding with strange chemical anomalies and industrial residues. Future beings studying the rocks may wonder what happened, They may ask, did a species rise, dominate, and then destroy itself? And in that question, they may find themselves reflecting on the very same uncertainties we face when we look back at Earth's past. Perhaps this is the ultimate irony. By questioning whether earlier civilizations existed and whether they might have caused extinctions, we are also forced to confront our own precarious position. We may not just be investigators of past collapses, we may be participants in one unfolding right now. And just as we wonder about the civilizations that may have come before us, one day others may wonder about us, piecing together the story of a species that reached for the stars, but left behind little more than a thin scar in the rocks and the memory of extinction. When we think of history, we tend to picture a clean, linear timeline. Humanity crawled out of the Stone Age, slowly learned to farm, then built cities, empires, and eventually the modern world. But sprinkled throughout this timeline are anomalies, artifacts, structures, and discoveries that don't seem to belong. They stand like splinters in the neat story we're told, refusing to fit into the accepted narrative. Scholars often dismiss them as hoaxes, misunderstandings, or isolated curiosities. Yet the sheer number and persistence of these mysteries suggest something more. What if some of these impossible artifacts are not mistakes of archaeology, but fragments of much older stories of civilizations erased by time, whose remains surface now and again like ghosts from the deep past? One of the most famous anomalies is the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece in 1901. This device, dated to around 100 BCE, is often described as the world's first computer. Its intricate gears and precision engineering could predict eclipses and track celestial movements with uncanny accuracy. For centuries, no other known technology came close to this level of sophistication. It's not that ancient Greeks were incapable of brilliance. They clearly were, but the Antikythera mechanism seems to appear out of nowhere, with no clear lineage of development before it, and no continuation afterward. Did it represent a lost inheritance of knowledge, perhaps passed down from an even earlier civilization? If such a device had been discovered in a stratum millions of years older, would we recognize it for what it is? Or would we dismiss it as impossible? Then there are the so-called out-of-place artifacts, or OPARTs, found in contexts that defy explanation. Spark plugs embedded in rock metal spheres with grooves too precise for natural formation, or apparent machined objects discovered in coal seams supposedly millions of years old. Mainstream scientists often argue these are natural formations, contamination, or outright fabrications. And indeed, skepticism is necessary. But even if 99% are explainable, what if even one is genuine? One real anomaly could overturn our entire view of history. It only takes a single undeniable artifact to prove that civilization existed long before we believe possible. Another layer of mystery comes from ancient megalithic structures scattered across the globe. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey have upended our understanding of human history. This vast ceremonial complex, built around 11,500 years ago, predates agriculture and organized cities. According to traditional timelines, hunter-gatherers of that era should not have had the resources or organizational ability to construct such monumental architecture. Yet here it is, stone pillars weighing tons, carved with intricate symbols, buried and preserved for millennia. Who built it, and why? Was it truly the work of early humans experimenting with large-scale construction? Or was it the faint echo of knowledge handed down from a civilization that had already risen and fallen? Egypt's pyramids and Sphinx also feed into this mystery. While mainstream archaeology places their construction around 4,500 years ago, alternative theories suggest parts of these structures may be far older. Some researchers point to erosion patterns on the Sphinx that seem consistent with heavy rainfall, which would place its origins back in a wetter climate, perhaps 7,000 to 10,000 years ago. If true, it would mean the builders had access to advanced engineering skills long before the rise of known Egyptian civilization. And if such structures are older than we think, then what other traces of lost societies might lie buried beneath sand, soil, or ocean floors, simply waiting to be uncovered? The oceans themselves may hold the greatest secrets. Vast swaths of the seafloor remain unmapped, and legends of sunken cities like Atlantis continue to stir curiosity. Off the coast of Japan, near Yonaguni, a massive underwater formation has sparked debate for decades. Its straight edges, steps, and terraces resemble human-made architecture, though skeptics insist it is a natural geological formation. But the question lingers. If rising seas swallowed entire coastlines at the end of the last ice age, could advanced coastal societies have been drowned, leaving their monuments submerged? The timing aligns with catastrophic floods caused by melting glaciers, events remembered in myths across cultures. The possibility is more than just fantasy. It's a question of whether we have looked deeply enough beneath the waves. Another strange thread is the presence of maps and knowledge that seem to predate the societies that supposedly created them. The Piri race map, drawn in 1513, has been cited as an anomaly because it appears to depict the coastlines of South America, and possibly even Antarctica, with surprising accuracy. Mainstream scholars attribute it to the compilation of earlier maps by explorers, but alternative thinkers argue it suggests the inheritance of geographical knowledge from civilizations far older than the Age of Discovery, civilizations with navigational abilities we don't credit them with. Beyond artifacts and structures, there are human remains themselves that don't always fit into the tidy evolutionary ladder we're taught. Stories circulate of giant skeletons unearthed in North America, of anatomically modern humans found in strata far older than they should be. While many of these claims remain unverified or outright debunked, they fuel the question: how much of our fossil record is complete, and how much has been suppressed, ignored, or lost? If a species similar to ours had risen millions of years earlier, could their remains have been overlooked, dismissed, or explained away? What makes these artifacts so compelling is not just their existence, but the way they collectively challenge the narrative of human uniqueness and linear progress. Each anomaly, on its own, might be dismissed, but together they form a pattern that whispers of forgotten knowledge, erased chapters, and the possibility that history is not what we think it is. Imagine a future where our own civilization collapses, leaving behind scattered remnants. In 10 million years, what would be found? A few fragments of plastic hardened into stone, a stray piece of technology, perhaps a building foundation buried under layers of sediment. Most of it would be gone, indistinguishable from nature. Would future beings dismiss these remnants as geological oddities, just as we dismiss OO parts today? These questions cut deeper than archaeology. They touch on the fragility of memory, the arrogance of assuming we are the first, and the haunting possibility that time itself conspires to erase civilizations. If impossible artifacts are truly evidence of lost societies, then history is far older and stranger than we imagine. But even if they are not, their very existence as mysteries forces us to confront how little we know and how much could still be hidden beneath the surface of our planet. And here's where the tension builds. If the Earth has already hidden entire civilizations from us, then perhaps our own will one day be just another mystery, reduced to a handful of inexplicable objects. But that wasn't the whole story, because the next puzzle lies not in artifacts, but in the messages left behind by myths, legends, and oral traditions, stories that might hold the key to understanding what came before us. Throughout human history, myths have served as both entertainment and explanation. They were ways for ancient peoples to pass down knowledge, explain natural disasters, or provide moral lessons. But what if myths are more than symbolic stories? What if they are fragments of real memories, distorted by centuries of retelling, pointing toward events so ancient that conventional history cannot account for them? The idea is as controversial as it is fascinating, that myths may serve as cultural fossils, preserving echoes of forgotten civilizations, cataclysms, and encounters with knowledge that didn't belong to the era in which it appeared. When viewed through this lens, legends of floods, sky gods, golden ages, and lost lands begin to look less like fantasies and more like dimly remembered chapters of human, or even pre-human history. The most common and compelling of these myths are the flood stories. Nearly every culture on Earth has a tale of a great deluge that wiped out entire civilizations. In the Bible, it is Noah's Ark. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh describes Utnapishtim building a great vessel to survive the floods sent by angry gods. In Hindu tradition, the story of Manu recounts how he was warned by a fish to build a boat and survive a flood that would reset humanity. Indigenous peoples of the Americas, Pacific Islanders, and African tribes all tell variations of the same event: a massive flood that destroyed the world as it was known. Could this global consistency be more than coincidence? Geologists point to the end of the last ice age, when glaciers melted and sea levels rose dramatically, drowning coastlines and reshaping continents. These events would have seemed like apocalyptic floods to survivors, leaving such an impression that the story was burned into humanity's collective memory. But if those survivors were remnants of advanced societies, then flood myths may represent more than nature's wrath. They may be the last whispers of civilization swallowed by rising waters. Equally intriguing are myths about sky beings, or gods descending from above, teaching humans the arts of civilization. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, deities who came from the heavens and bestowed knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and governance. The Dogon people of Mali describe beings from the Sirius star system who shared astronomical knowledge long before telescopes existed. Mesoamerican cultures spoke of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who brought learning, calendars, and science. In Polynesia, myths tell of shining beings who arrived in canoes from the stars. While these tales are often dismissed as imaginative, they raise the question: are they symbolic stories of early humans grappling with new ideas, or are they distorted memories of encounters with a civilization far more advanced than we acknowledge, perhaps even one that predated us? Then there are the Golden Age myths, which appear in traditions from Greece to India. The Greeks wrote of an idyllic era when humanity lived in peace and abundance, free from suffering. Hindu texts describe the Satya Yuga, the first of 4 great ages, when truth and virtue ruled before decline set in. Native American legends speak of times when the world was in perfect harmony, disrupted only by human failings or cosmic upheaval. These stories may not be mere nostalgia or morality tales. Instead, they could reflect real epochs when societies thrived under advanced systems of knowledge, only to collapse into chaos after catastrophe or internal decay. The fact that so many disparate cultures recall a lost golden age suggests it may not be fantasy at all, but a memory of civilizations that achieved greatness long before our recorded history begins. Another striking feature of myths is their consistent reference to cycles of destruction and rebirth. Hindu cosmology describes endless cycles of creation and dissolution, with each world age ending in fire, flood, or upheaval. The Mayan calendar, often sensationalized as predicting the end of the world in 2012, is built on cycles of ages destroyed by natural disasters. Norse mythology tells of Ragnarok, a fiery apocalypse followed by renewal. These aren't just isolated tales, they form a global pattern of civilizations rising, falling, and starting anew. Could this be humanity's subconscious acknowledgement of something written deep in Earth's memory? Perhaps survivors of previous cataclysms encoded their warnings into myth, knowing that future generations would need to remember that collapse is always a possibility. Even more perplexing are myths that contain technological or scientific knowledge long before such things were possible. Ancient Hindu texts like the Mahabharata and Ramayana describe flying machines called vimanas, capable of crossing the sky and engaging in battles with weapons that sound eerily like descriptions of modern nuclear warfare. The texts describe flashes brighter than 1,000 suns, heat so intense it could turn sand into glass, and devastation that lingered for generations. Mainstream historians classify these passages as poetic exaggeration, but skeptics ask, how did ancient storytellers imagine machines and weapons so similar to modern technology, unless they were drawing from some buried memory? Could these epics be distorted accounts of real events, retold in mythic language? Similarly, the Hopi people of North America tell of previous worlds destroyed by fire and flood, and how survivors were guided underground by spiritual beings. They describe multiple epochs before our own, each ending in disaster. What is fascinating is how closely these stories align with geologic evidence of repeated mass extinctions and climate upheavals. The myths, in essence, preserve a timeline that science is only now piecing together, though from a vastly different perspective. Could the alignment be coincidence, or are myths carrying scientific truth wrapped in allegory? There are also myths that seem to hint at global connections long before the known age of exploration. Cultures separated by oceans tell similar tales of serpent gods, cosmic battles, and underworld journeys. For example, the serpent appears in Mesoamerican mythology as Quetzalcoatl, in Norse mythology as Jörmungandr, and in Hindu traditions as Anantashesha. These parallel symbols may reflect universal archetypes of the human mind, or they may be remnants of shared knowledge from a time when civilizations were connected in ways we can't yet comprehend. The skeptic's counterargument is clear. Myths are metaphors, not memories. They reflect the imagination of ancient peoples, not literal events. Yet, the persistence and global consistency of these stories challenge that view. Even if they are symbolic, Symbols often encode truth. A flood myth may not describe a single global event, but could be rooted in multiple local cataclysms tied to sea level rise. A sky god story may not be aliens descending from the stars, but could be memories of survivors of advanced societies appearing godlike to less advanced neighbors. The possibility that myth and memory overlap is not only plausible, it is likely. The real power of myths lies in their ability to preserve knowledge across unimaginable stretches of time. Oral traditions can survive thousands of years, especially when tied to cultural identity. Archaeology gives us artifacts, geology gives us rocks, but myths give us context, a narrative lens to interpret the past. They may not always be literal, but they may encode warnings, histories, and wisdom meant to survive where physical evidence could not. In this way, myths might be humanity's most durable archive, outlasting civilizations and even languages. What makes this possibility so haunting is that we may already be living inside one of these myths. Our age of industry, technology, and global dominance could be the golden age remembered in some distant future story, retold by survivors of our own collapse. If we fall, the remnants of our world, skyscrapers crumbled, satellites burned, oceans risen, may echo through myths of tomorrow, just as the myths of yesterday may be echoing to us now. But that wasn't the whole story, because myths are not the only clues. They are accompanied by physical mysteries, strange alignments, and cosmic anomalies that suggest the possibility of influences from beyond Earth itself. And that is where the next layer of the mystery unfolds. For centuries, humanity has looked to the night sky with a mixture of awe and suspicion. The stars have inspired myths, guided navigation, and sparked endless questions about whether we are alone in the universe. But beyond the philosophical wonder lies a deeper, more unsettling question. What if the stars have already visited us? What if the stories of gods descending from the heavens, of sky chariots, and blazing wheels are not mere inventions of the human imagination, but distorted recollections of encounters with beings far beyond our understanding? And if that is true, then our place in history becomes even more uncertain, because it would mean we are not the sole authors of civilization's story, but inheritors of knowledge sparked by contact with cosmic visitors. The idea of alien influence on Earth is not new. Ancient astronaut theories, popularized in the 20th century, suggest that humanity's leaps in culture, science, and architecture were not entirely our own doing. Critics dismiss this as pseudo-history, but the evidence, however speculative, is difficult to ignore. Consider the sudden emergence of monumental structures around the globe, pyramids in Egypt and Mesoamerica, megaliths like Stonehenge, and precision-cut stone walls in South America that even modern engineers find challenging to replicate. These sites often align with astronomical phenomena, solstices, equinoxes, and constellations. Were ancient builders simply exceptionally skilled observers of the sky, or were they following instructions from beings who had come from it? The myths and legends of countless cultures give weight to the possibility. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are described as deities from the heavens who bestowed agriculture, governance, and mathematics upon humanity. In Hindu epics, the sky is filled with vimanas, flying chariots, capable of traversing great distances and engaging in battles with weapons resembling missiles or lasers. The Book of Ezekiel in the Hebrew Bible describes visions of wheels within wheels, glowing beings, and fiery chariots descending from the heavens, imagery that reads more like a description of advanced technology than of purely spiritual vision. Even the Native American Hopi people tell stories of sky beings who guided them through cycles of destruction and rebirth. The consistency of these stories across continents and millennia suggests more than mere coincidence. Skeptics argue that humans project their own imagination into the unknown, and that stories of sky gods reflect nothing more than the human desire to explain the mysterious. Yet the troubling question remains: how did so many disparate cultures imagine beings descending from the sky, teaching knowledge, and then vanishing? Was it simply a shared psychological archetype, or were these fragmented cultural memories of real encounters? Physical evidence also adds intrigue. Consider the Nazca lines in Peru, vast geoglyphs carved into the desert, visible only from the air. They depict animals, plants, and geometric shapes, stretching for miles. To this day, no one fully understands their purpose. Were they ritualistic offerings to gods, calendrical systems, or, as some theorists propose, signals or landing strips for beings observing from above? Another example is the pyramids of Giza, whose alignment with Orion's belt has sparked speculation about stellar connections. While mainstream archaeology insists they were tombs, no mummies have ever been found within them. Could they have served another function, perhaps tied to celestial visitors? Even modern science has stumbled upon mysteries that raise eyebrows. Strange isotopic anomalies in ancient artifacts, unexplained aerial phenomena recorded in military encounters, and the vastness of the universe itself all suggest that contact is not impossible. In recent years, governments have begun to release declassified files acknowledging identified aerial phenomena, UAPs, that defy conventional explanation. If such objects are visiting us now, why should we assume they haven't been visiting us for millennia? One compelling angle is the idea of cargo cults. In the Pacific during World War II, isolated islanders encountered advanced technology in the form of airplanes, ships and soldiers. To them, these seemed like gods descending from the heavens bringing gifts. They built ritualistic replicas of runways and aircraft, hoping for the return of these divine visitors. Anthropologists use this to explain how ancient humans might have mythologized encounters with advanced beings. What we interpret today as myths of gods and chariots might in fact be cultural cargo cults born from real interactions with extraterrestrial visitors. If alien contact did occur, the next question is, why did they leave, or why do they hide? Some theories suggest they interfered only briefly, nudging humanity along before withdrawing to watch from a distance. Others propose darker explanations, that civilizations rise and fall under their silent observation, part of an experiment or natural cycle of intelligence in the universe. The absence of open contact today may not be absence at all, but rather a reflection of our inability to recognize the signs. After all, if an ant looked at a human skyscraper, would it understand what it was seeing? Even more unsettling is the possibility that alien visitors played a role in Earth's cycles of destruction. Myths of gods punishing humanity with fire and flood could reflect interventions by powerful beings rather than natural disasters. Advanced technology could simulate divine wrath in the eyes of ancient humans. Some researchers even speculate that mass extinction events, like sudden asteroid impacts, might not always be accidents of nature, but interventions resets to clear the slate for new evolutionary experiments. Though highly speculative, the idea forces us to confront the possibility that humanity is not entirely the master of its fate. What ties this speculation together is the eerie silence of official history. Archaeologists rarely acknowledge the possibility of alien influence, preferring explanations that fit within human ingenuity. And to be clear, human creativity and resilience are extraordinary. Our ancestors were brilliant, but acknowledging their brilliance does not preclude the possibility of external influence. If anything, it makes the idea more plausible. Perhaps humanity was already capable, but a spark from elsewhere accelerated our trajectory. If cosmic visitors truly shaped our history, the implications are staggering. It would mean we are not a lonely accident in a vast indifferent universe. Instead, we would be part of a larger story of civilizations, contact and exchange. It would mean myths, artifacts and alignments are not curiosities, but evidence of a legacy far greater than we admit, and it would force us to rethink our future. If they came before, might they come again? If they are watching, how will they judge us? And this is where the mystery deepens. Because whether or not aliens ever set foot on Earth, the belief in them, the stories of their presence has shaped civilizations, inspired religions, and influenced how we see ourselves in the cosmos. The question of cosmic visitors is not just about the past, it's about what kind of story we are writing for the future. If our myths and artifacts are whispers of contact, then the silence we hear today may not be the absence of life, but the calm before the next chapter. But that wasn't the whole story, because even beyond visitors from the stars, there are patterns in Earth's own cycles that suggest history itself may be far older and stranger than we imagine. The next step takes us into the question of time loops, recurring civilizations, and the possibility that humanity is just one iteration in an endless cycle of rise and collapse. One of the most haunting patterns in both science and myth is the idea that history is not a straight line, but a cycle. Civilizations rise, flourish, and collapse, only for new ones to emerge from the ashes. It's a rhythm we can see in recorded history. Mesopotamia gave way to Persia, Persia to Greece, Greece to Rome, Rome to Europe's medieval kingdoms, and eventually to the modern nations we know today. Yet when you look deeper beyond the last few thousand years, there are hints that this cycle stretches much further back, repeating on a scale of tens of thousands. even millions of years. Could it be that humanity, or perhaps other intelligent species before us, has lived through many forgotten cycles of creation, destruction, and rebirth? The ancients certainly seem to think so. Hindu cosmology speaks of the yugas, vast epochs that repeat endlessly. Satya Yuga, the Golden Age, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga, each one marked by a gradual decline in morality, knowledge, and harmony. At the end of the cycle, destruction comes, and then the process begins anew. The Mayans described a similar vision of time, with successive suns or ages destroyed by fire, flood, or earthquakes. The Hopi people tell of multiple worlds before this one, each wiped clean by catastrophe. Even Plato, in his dialogues, speaks of civilizations that rose and fell long before Athens, lost to floods and fire. When so many unrelated cultures speak of repeating ages, it suggests more than coincidence. These myths may not be metaphor alone. They may be distorted records of real cycles humanity has endured. Geology lends credibility to the idea. The Earth has indeed seen cycles of catastrophe and renewal. Ice ages advance and retreat, reshaping the land and erasing coastlines. Supervolcanoes erupt, casting ash into the sky and collapsing ecosystems. Asteroids strike, resetting the evolutionary clock. Tectonic shifts push up mountains and swallow continents. Each cycle wipes the slate partially clean, leaving room for new life to dominate. If civilizations had risen in distant prehistory, these cycles could have buried, drowned, or obliterated their remains. Just as we now struggle to find traces of societies that lived a mere 12,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age, how much harder would it be to detect evidence millions of years later? Take the Younger Dryas event around 12,800 years ago. This sudden return to near glacial conditions after a warming period triggered massive environmental upheaval. Megafauna such as mammoths and saber-toothed cats went extinct, while human populations were forced to adapt dramatically. Some researchers suggest it was caused by a comet impact, others by shifts in ocean circulation. But what is most fascinating is how closely this event aligns with myths of a great flood and the destruction of a previous world age. Could the Younger Dryas have marked not just the end of an ice age, but also the collapse of an advanced culture we barely remember? Göbekli Tepe, built around this time, hints that humans were capable of more than we assumed. Was it a lone anomaly, or the surviving fragment of a cycle already turning? Even within the last few thousand years, we see the fragility of civilizations. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 and 1200 BCE saw nearly every advanced society in the Mediterranean. Mycenae, Hittites, and parts of Egypt fall into ruin in a matter of decades. Climate change, invasions, and economic failure created a domino effect. A whole world order crumbled, ushering in centuries of decline. This was not the first such collapse, nor would it be the last. The lesson is clear. Civilizations, no matter how advanced, are vulnerable to the forces of time. But what if these collapses are not isolated? What if they are echoes of a deeper cycle woven into Earth's history? Some theorists argue that cosmic forces, such as the solar system's movement through the galaxy, expose Earth to periodic bombardments of comets or radiation, triggering mass extinctions and societal resets. Others point to the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle that ancient cultures seemed oddly aware of, as if they were tracking cosmic rhythms tied to human destiny. If time is cyclical, then the rise and fall of civilizations may not be accidents, but inevitabilities woven into the very fabric of our planet's story. The possibility of forgotten civilizations adds weight to this perspective. Imagine a society as advanced as ours, existing 100,000 years ago. Their cities, built on coastlines, would now lie deep beneath the sea, buried under silt and coral. Their technologies, made of metal and plastic, would corrode and decay, leaving almost nothing behind. After millions of years, only subtle chemical traces might remain, tiny anomalies in the geological record, indistinguishable from natural variation. In such a scenario, entire ages of humanity could have risen and fallen without leaving clear evidence. We would be left with only myths, half-buried artifacts, and unexplained anomalies as clues. This cyclical vision of time changes everything about how we view ourselves. If we are merely the latest iteration in a repeating cycle, then our technological triumphs are not unique, but part of a pattern: rise, overreach, collapse, and silence. Each age may think it is the first and the last, yet each becomes forgotten, buried under the next. The arrogance of believing we are the pinnacle of history is shattered by the possibility that others have stood here before us, staring at the stars, building great cities, and then vanishing without a trace. The chilling thought is that cycles may not just be natural, but unavoidable. Civilizations collapse, not just because of disasters, but because of their own internal flaws: greed, resource depletion, war, and hubris. Our own society already shows signs of fragility: ecosystems collapsing, climate changing, nuclear tensions simmering, and technological dependencies that could crumble with the slightest disruption. If cycles are inevitable, then we too are heading toward collapse, destined to become just another forgotten age. But perhaps cycles also carry hope. Just as destruction repeats, so does renewal. After each collapse, survivors begin again, carrying fragments of the old world into the new. Myths, knowledge, and warnings are passed down, sometimes encoded in story, sometimes buried in stone. Perhaps this is why myths of golden ages, floods, and cosmic cycles are so persistent. They are the voices of past survivors, whispering to us across time. If we listen, perhaps we can learn enough to break the cycle, or at least to survive it with more wisdom than those before us. And this brings us to the most haunting question of all. If civilizations have risen and fallen countless times, then what age are we in now? Are we at the beginning of something unprecedented, or are we nearing the end of another turn of the wheel? The silence of history offers no answer, but the pattern is there, carved into myth, encoded in geology, and reflected in the fragility of every society that has ever existed. The cycle may be inevitable, but it does not have to define us. Whether we become a forgotten chapter or the first to break the pattern depends on the choices we make now. And that wasn't the whole story, because if cycles of time are real, then the next question is even stranger. Could we already be seeing evidence of those past civilizations in places we've dismissed as natural, accidental, or misunderstood? If lost civilizations really existed before us, their remains wouldn't always be hidden deep underground or erased entirely by time. Sometimes the most startling clues could be right in front of us, hiding in plain sight, overlooked because we're conditioned to see them as something ordinary, or worse, to dismiss them outright. The paradox of lost history is that its fragments may not be buried in mystery at all, but scattered across our world in ways that seem almost too obvious. The real question is, are we too blind, too proud, or too dismissive to recognize them? Take the case of megalithic structures. Across the globe, massive stone monuments exist that defy simple explanations. The Great Pyramid of Giza, with its astonishing precision and alignment to the cardinal directions, remains one of the most studied yet least understood constructions in human history. Conventional explanations say it was built around 4,500 years ago with copper tools and manpower, but the sheer scale, weight, and engineering of the stones raise questions that mainstream archaeology often avoids. Were these truly the efforts of primitive tools and brute labor? Or are we looking at the last echoes of knowledge carried over from a far older, forgotten culture? Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey adds another layer to this puzzle. Dated to around 11,000 years ago, it predates farming, writing, and even organized settlements. Yet the site shows advanced architectural skill, astronomical alignments, and symbolic carvings that suggest a complex worldview. If this was humanity's first step toward civilization, it seems almost too sophisticated, as if knowledge had been preserved from an earlier time. Mainstream archaeology calls it the world's first temple, but what if it's really the first visible trace of a cycle of civilizations restarting after a cataclysm? The question grows more pressing when you consider underwater structures like those off the coast of Yonaguni in Japan. Beneath the waves lies a sprawling formation with terraces, steps, and what appear to be carved features. Some argue it's a natural geological phenomenon, while others insist the precision of its angles and symmetry reveal it to be man-made. If it is artificial, then it means an advanced culture thrived there over 10,000 years ago, before rising seas swallowed their cities. Similar stories emerge from sites like Dwarka in India, ruins beneath the Gulf of Cambay, and other submerged structures found worldwide. The oceans covering most of the planet could easily conceal entire chapters of human history that remain invisible to us. But not all evidence is monumental or obvious. Sometimes anomalies show up in the smallest details: out-of-place artifacts, Objects that don't fit into the accepted timeline have been discovered for centuries. Metal spheres dated to billions of years old, ancient maps like the Piri Reis chart that depicts Antarctica free of ice, or the Baghdad battery, which may have been an ancient power source. These anomalies stir curiosity, but are often brushed aside as coincidences, frauds, or misinterpretations. Yet if you look at them collectively, a pattern emerges. The possibility that civilizations before us reached levels of sophistication we are reluctant to acknowledge. Even myths, dismissed as mere stories, could be pieces of evidence hiding in plain sight. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes a great flood eerily similar to Noah's Ark. Ancient Hindu texts describe flying machines called vimanas and weapons that sound strikingly like modern technology. The Dogon people of Mali, without telescopes, knew details about the Sirius star system that science only confirmed recently. Are these just coincidences, or are they fragments of memory preserved through oral tradition, carrying whispers of civilizations wiped away but not entirely forgotten? What's even more fascinating is how mainstream science sometimes unintentionally supports these mysteries. For example, scientists have identified geological anomalies, spikes in isotopes, sudden climate changes, or unusual deposits of material that don't fit into the normal patterns of Earth's history. Officially, these are explained as volcanic activity, asteroid impacts, or random climate fluctuations. But could some of these anomalies represent the industrial footprints of lost civilization? If our own society collapsed tomorrow, the geological record might one day show strange chemical signatures from plastics, fossil fuels, and nuclear waste. If such signatures exist in the distant past, how would we recognize them? The deeper problem is human bias. Archaeology, like any science, is shaped by assumptions. If evidence doesn't fit the accepted timeline, it's often dismissed rather than investigated. The very idea of a lost civilization contradicts the narrative of human progress, that we have been on a steady climb from primitive to advanced. To accept otherwise would mean rewriting history books, rethinking human identity, and admitting that we may not be unique. That's why so much potential evidence remains hidden in plain sight. Not because it's invisible, but because we refuse to see it. Consider the Nazca lines in Peru, gigantic geoglyphs etched into the desert floor, visible only from above, raise questions about their purpose. Mainstream interpretations say they were ritualistic, perhaps designed to be seen by gods in the sky. But why would a culture without flight create designs only visible from high altitude? Could they have been working with knowledge of aerial perspectives? Or were they remnants of practices handed down from an earlier age with different capabilities? The fact that these lines have lasted thousands of years while other aspects of that culture have vanished shows how selective survival can be. We see only fragments of what once was, and those fragments confuse. The same is true with Easter Island's Moai statues. Enormous stone heads, some with buried bodies beneath, sit across the island. They were created by the Rapa Nui people, but the sheer size, transport, and construction remain hotly debated. Were these monuments purely symbolic, or did they represent knowledge of something deeper, perhaps even echoes of lost contact with seafaring cultures long gone? Their presence suggests advanced skills that don't match the narrative of isolation and simplicity often applied to ancient island cultures. Even more provocative are the alignments of ancient sites across the globe. The pyramids of Egypt, the ruins of Teotihuacan in Mexico, and the pyramids of China all align with astronomical patterns, particularly Orion's belt. Why would cultures separated by oceans, languages, and millennia focus on the same constellation? Is it coincidence, or is it evidence of a shared memory, or perhaps even a shared teacher? These connections, hiding in plain sight, suggest a deeper unity to ancient human history that we are only beginning to recognize. But the most unsettling hidden evidence may be the silence itself. The absence of traces can be as telling as their presence. If advanced civilizations existed before us, their remains would not look like ours. They may not have built skyscrapers or left behind plastics. They may have pursued technologies we can't imagine, biological, acoustic, or even energy-based systems that leave almost no trace after thousands of years. In that case, the hidden evidence is everywhere and nowhere, waiting for us to ask the right questions rather than forcing it into the boxes we already have. So what do we do with this possibility? Do we dismiss it as speculation, or do we embrace the mystery? Hidden evidence in plain sight forces us to confront the fragility of our assumptions. It reminds us that history is not a fixed story but an ongoing investigation, one where new discoveries can upend everything we thought we knew. If we dare to look with open eyes, we might see that we are not the first, not the only, and not guaranteed to be remembered. And what comes next makes the mystery even deeper, because if evidence of lost civilization surrounds us, hiding in the open, then the bigger question is, why does so much of it seem to vanish when we try to look close? Could there be forces, natural, human, or even something else, that actively erase history before it can be uncovered? That's where the story takes a darker turn. When we think of history, we often picture a neat timeline stretching back through the centuries, each chapter filled with carefully preserved evidence, monuments, ruins, artifacts, and written records that explain who we were and how we lived. But the truth is far messier. Earth is not a museum designed to safeguard memory. It is a living, restless planet that constantly reshapes itself. In this endless cycle of creation and destruction, entire civilizations could rise, flourish, and disappear without leaving behind more than a whisper in the geological record. If ancient advanced cultures existed, the biggest challenge in proving their existence isn't that they never left evidence. It's that their evidence may have been systematically erased, either by natural forces or perhaps even by design. First, let's consider the natural erasers of history. Earth's surface is in perpetual motion, thanks to plate tectonics. The continents drift, collide, and submerge, recycling the crust into the mantle. Over tens of millions of years, vast swaths of land vanish entirely, leaving no trace of what may have stood there. If an ancient civilization thrived on a landmass that has since been subducted beneath the ocean, its ruins would have been pulverized, melted, and absorbed into the deep earth, erased beyond recognition. Even without subduction, erosion by wind, rain, and glaciers can grind monumental structures into dust over time. A building that looks eternal to us today is no match for 100,000 years of relentless weathering. Then there's the ocean. Sea levels have risen and fallen dramatically throughout Earth's history. During the last ice age, massive portions of what is now the continental shelf were dry land, potentially home to thriving human or pre-human communities. When the ice melted around 12,000 years ago, oceans rose by more than 400 feet, swallowing coastal settlements worldwide. Imagine New York, Tokyo, or London sinking beneath the waves today. Within a few thousand years, little would remain visible, and in 10,000 years, even their memory could be gone. Multiply this cycle over millions of years, and it's entirely plausible that civilizations we've never known once flourished in regions that are now silent seabeds. Volcanic activity adds another destructive force to the mix. Cities buried by eruptions, like Pompeii, show us how quickly human achievements can vanish beneath layers of ash. While Pompeii was preserved by chance, countless others may have been destroyed and lost forever. Earthquakes, landslides, and floods can obliterate entire cultures in a single event. The sediment left behind buries evidence so deeply that even modern excavation might never uncover it. But beyond natural forces, there is the question of deliberate erasure. Civilizations, including our own, have a tendency to overwrite the past. Conquerors destroy the monuments and records of their enemies. Religious revolutions burn libraries, erase symbols, and ban texts. Cultural shifts devalue old knowledge and leave it to rot. How many works of ancient science and philosophy were lost when the Library of Alexandria burned? How many inventions, stories, and histories were destroyed during conquests across the globe? If humanity does this to itself in the span of a few centuries, imagine what could happen over tens of thousands or even millions of years. The collective memory of a lost civilization could be intentionally purged, leaving behind only scattered, distorted fragments. Even myths and legends may themselves be the remnants of erased history. Ancient cultures often spoke of golden ages that ended in catastrophic floods, wars, or divine retribution. These stories, passed down through generations, might be coded memories of real events, civilizations that were wiped clean from the earth, leaving only tales for survivors to share. Yet over time, stories transform, merging fact with allegory, until what was once history becomes myth. By the time we inherit these myths, the truth has been buried under layers of metaphor, dismissed as fantasy. In this way, history can be erased not just physically, but psychologically. What's even more unsettling is the idea that evidence may be erased by something beyond human control. Consider the theory of the Silurian hypothesis, posed by modern scientists. It suggests that if an industrial civilization had existed on Earth millions of years ago, the signs would be almost impossible to find today. Plastics, metals, and even radioactive isotopes could degrade, scatter, or be recycled by Earth's processes. In a few million years, all that might remain would be subtle chemical anomalies in sediment layers, an indistinct signal we might easily confuse with natural causes. This means it's not just possible for civilizations to vanish without a trace. It may actually be inevitable. But there's another, more provocative possibility. What if erasure wasn't always accidental? Imagine a civilization advanced enough to understand the power of destruction. Perhaps they realized that wiping their own records was necessary to reset humanity, or to protect dangerous knowledge from being misused. Could it be that traces of their existence were deliberately concealed, hidden beneath layers of secrecy, or even destroyed by the civilizations themselves in their final days? If so, what we see as a lack of evidence may actually be the result of intentional efforts to make sure the past could never be rediscovered. Even in our own time, we're not immune to erasure. Our digital age, for all its sophistication, is precarious. Vast amounts of human knowledge are stored on servers, hard drives, and cloud systems. Without constant maintenance, these records could vanish in decades. A single global catastrophe could wipe out libraries, data centers, and archives, leaving little behind. If our society collapsed tomorrow, how much of our knowledge would survive? Stone monuments like Mount Rushmore or the pyramids might endure in some form, but our satellites, skyscrapers, and data systems would decay quickly. In a million years, the chances of future archaeologists finding proof of our existence would be slim. If this is true for us, why should we expect it to have been different for anyone who came before? The scariest part of erasure is its silence. Unlike the discovery of ruins, artifacts, or fossils, erasure leaves nothing to analyze. It creates voids in the record, gaps in the timeline, and mysteries that can't be solved because the evidence is simply gone. It leaves us questioning whether our linear narrative of progress is built on a foundation of missing chapters. And when those voids align with strange anomalies, sudden climate shifts, unexplained spikes in carbon, mysterious cultural leaps, they whisper of possibilities we're too cautious to accept. Perhaps that's the final lesson in all this. History is fragile. What we know of the past is only a fraction of what really happened, and most of it has already been erased. Our arrogance in thinking we understand the whole story blinds us to the truth that entire civilizations could rise, thrive, and vanish, leaving behind nothing but questions. If that's the case, then humanity's own future is a warning. We too may one day be erased, leaving behind no more than faint traces for someone else to stumble upon and wonder, just as we do now, were we really the first? Or just the latest in a cycle of civilizations destined to disappear? And as you'll see, if erasure explains why we can't find evidence, it also raises another unsettling possibility. Maybe the evidence isn't gone, it's simply been hidden, waiting for the right eyes to recognize it. But that raises a darker question: who or what might be hiding it, and why? Throughout history, moments arise when discoveries seem to challenge the accepted story of our past, only to be silenced, discredited, or buried under layers of denial. Some call it science protecting itself from falsehood. Others suspect something far stranger, a system, intentional or not, that suppresses anything which doesn't fit the official narrative. And when we look closer, it's clear that countless findings hinting at ancient mysteries have either been dismissed without serious study, locked away from public view, or ridiculed until they fade from memory. This pattern of suppression begs the question: is it simply human stubbornness at work? Or is there something more deliberate about the way inconvenient truths are erased? Take, for instance, the puzzling artifacts discovered deep within coal seams or ancient rock layers, supposedly millions of years old, yet containing objects that look disturbingly artificial. Reports of metallic spheres, tools, or even imprints resembling machinery have occasionally surfaced, but almost as quickly they're written off as mistakes, hoaxes, or anomalies unworthy of further investigation. While skepticism is healthy, the speed with which such accounts vanish from scientific discussion feels less like reason and more like fear of rewriting everything we thought we knew. After all, if a tool existed millions of years before humans were supposed to exist, that would shake the foundation of archaeology, anthropology, and history itself. Another layer of suppression lies in how institutions handle discoveries that might alter the established timeline. The story of the Great Pyramids, for example, is a tightly controlled narrative. Mainstream Egyptology insists on the pyramids being roughly 4,500 years old, but countless engineers, architects, and independent researchers argue that the scale, precision, and astronomical alignments suggest knowledge far beyond what Bronze Age tools should have achieved. Yet these voices are often sidelined, their research dismissed as pseudoscience, not because the questions aren't valid, but because the answers might unravel a carefully maintained timeline. To admit advanced knowledge so early would open the door to the possibility of forgotten civilizations or contact with something beyond our own species. Even when evidence isn't ancient, suppression still occurs. Consider the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. For decades it was dismissed as an oddity, before modern analysis revealed it to be an astonishingly complex analog computer, capable of predicting astronomical events with remarkable accuracy. The device rewrote our understanding of what ancient people were capable of, but for nearly a century it was treated as little more than a curiosity. How many other artifacts are languishing in museum basements or private collections, catalogued but not studied, because they don't fit the neat narrative we've been taught? Sometimes suppression isn't even malicious. It's economic. Archaeological digs require funding, and funding comes from institutions that prefer safe, predictable outcomes. Research that challenges dogma rarely gets grants, while studies reinforcing the existing timeline thrive. In this way, the system quietly rewards conformity and punishes deviation. Over time, entire generations of scientists are trained to dismiss anything that doesn't align with accepted history, ensuring that the cycle of suppression continues without anyone needing to conspire. It becomes cultural, invisible, yet incredibly effective. But there are darker whispers too, theories that suppression is not just an accident of bureaucracy, but an intentional act by groups who benefit from keeping humanity in the dark. Could it be that some discoveries reveal not just alternative histories, but hidden truths about power, technology, or our place in the cosmos? If a civilization before us harnessed energy, built machines, or even achieved space travel, what would it mean if we rediscovered their secrets? Entire industries, governments, and religions could lose control overnight. In such a scenario, the suppression of discoveries isn't just likely, it's inevitable. Stories from archaeologists and explorers fuel this suspicion. Accounts circulate of researchers stumbling upon ruins or artifacts that defy explanation, only to be silenced. Some claim findings vanish into the archives of large institutions, never to be seen again. Others describe the intimidation of whistleblowers who tried to speak out about strange discoveries in caves, pyramids, or under the sea. Whether these stories are exaggerations or truth, the pattern they suggest is chilling. If something is found that rewrites the narrative, it will be buried. And then there are the modern tools of suppression, ridicule and discrediting. Today, in an age of social media and instant information, not every inconvenient discovery can simply be hidden, but it can be mocked. Labeling researchers as cranks or conspiracy theorists is enough to keep the public from taking them seriously. A scientist with a groundbreaking theory risks their career by even considering evidence outside the mainstream. So the suppression doesn't need to be physical anymore. It happens through reputation, peer pressure, and fear of professional exile. The real tragedy of suppressed discoveries is not just what we lose in terms of artifacts or knowledge, but what it means for our imagination. Every time an anomaly is dismissed without fair investigation, we lose the chance to expand our understanding of what's possible. Every time a discovery is mocked, we silence a potential breakthrough. The effect is that humanity remains confined within a smaller, safer story of its past, one where civilization is young, progress is linear, and the mysteries of the past are just myths. But deep down, many people feel that story doesn't add up. Consider this. If even a fraction of the suppressed accounts are true, then humanity may already have stumbled upon proof of forgotten civilizations. It may already have touched the remnants of lost ages, only for those moments to be swept under the rug. That means the question isn't just whether lost civilizations existed, it's whether we've already found them and chosen consciously or unconsciously to pretend we haven't. And here's where the mystery deepens. Because if suppression is so widespread, it begs the question, what are we truly afraid of? Are we scared of chaos, of rewriting history, of confronting the fragility of our place in the timeline? Or are we afraid of the possibility that we are not alone, that intelligence has risen before us and may rise again after us, leaving us as nothing more than a temporary chapter in Earth's long story? But that's not the whole story. Suppression may explain why we haven't connected the dots, but it also hints at something larger. If there are forces working to keep us from the truth, then the truth itself must be powerful, even dangerous. And that leads us to the ultimate question: what kind of knowledge could be so earth-shattering that entire systems, institutions, and perhaps even hidden hands would move to erase it? When we zoom out far enough, human history doesn't look like a straight line. It looks more like a rhythm, a rise, a fall, and then a rise again. This cycle is written into the stories of every culture, into the myths of floods and fire, of golden ages and dark ages, and the more we examine it, the harder it is to ignore. Civilizations are not permanent fixtures of the earth. They are fragile, temporary experiments in order and ambition, destined to collapse under the weight of time, only to be replaced by the next attempt. The pattern is there, hiding in plain sight, and if it has happened countless times within recorded history, who's to say it hasn't happened countless more in the forgotten epochs that came before? Let's start with what we know. Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization, birthed some of humanity's earliest cities. Yet the Sumerians, who developed writing, advanced irrigation and monumental architecture, eventually crumbled. Their society fractured, their knowledge dissipated, and their culture was absorbed by those who came after. Egypt rose into glory with its pyramids, temples, and dynasties, only to decline, be conquered, and reinvented again and again. The Indus Valley civilization, one of the most sophisticated of the ancient world, vanished mysteriously, leaving behind advanced city grids, plumbing systems, and symbols we still cannot decipher. Greece flourished, then fell to Rome. Rome itself grew into an empire that dominated much of the known world, only to collapse into centuries of darkness, its innovations lost until rediscovered much later. The pattern is undeniable. Civilizations rise, peak, and collapse. Some last centuries, some millennia, but none last forever. If this is true for every culture we know of in the past 10,000 years, why should we assume the cycle didn't happen before recorded history began? What if civilizations have been rising and falling for millions of years, each time leaving behind only fragments or nothing at all? Cycles don't happen by accident. They are the result of pressure, both external and internal. Nature delivers catastrophic blows, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, floods, droughts, that wipe out cities and destabilize societies. But the more insidious destroyer often comes from within. Civilizations expand beyond their means, consuming resources faster than they can replace them. They become rigid, unable to adapt to change. They fracture under inequality, corruption, and war. And when collapse finally comes, it seems sudden, but it's usually been building for generations. Rome didn't fall in a day. It unraveled over centuries. The Maya didn't vanish overnight. Their society crumbled slowly under drought and political strife. These repeating themes suggest that collapse isn't the exception to civilization, it's the... Now, imagine if this cycle isn't just historical but geological. Suppose that hundreds of thousands of years ago, or even millions, a civilization rose to heights we can't imagine. Maybe they mastered technologies beyond our current comprehension, or maybe they built in harmony with nature in ways that left almost no footprint. But like every other civilization, they eventually faced the same pressure: a natural disaster, a self-inflicted collapse, or perhaps even a cosmic event like an asteroid strike brought them down. Over time, the traces of their existence vanished. If even Rome's marble, metal, and books barely survived 2,000 years, what hope would anything have after a million? The cycle also explains something else: the human fascination with lost golden ages. Nearly every culture has myths about a time when humanity lived closer to the gods, when knowledge was greater, when the world was whole. From Atlantis to Lemuria, from the Aztec tales of previous suns to Hindu cosmology with its endless yugas, the theme is the same: there were ages before us, and there will be ages after. These myths may not be literal, but what if they are memories passed down from survivors of past collapses? What if they're echoes of real civilizations that lived, fell, and were nearly forgotten, except in fragments of story? Some might argue that this is just metaphor, but even modern history shows us how knowledge is lost in cycles. After the fall of Rome, much of Western Europe forgot technologies that had been common for centuries: plumbing, concrete, advanced metallurgy. It took nearly 1,000 years for some of that knowledge to return. If such a regression could happen in a world with writing, monuments, and preserved records, Imagine the scale of forgetting that could occur if a truly global civilization collapsed long before humans developed the tools to preserve history. The silence of deep time could erase even the greatest of empires. But here's where the cycle becomes even more haunting. Every collapse creates the illusion that what follows is new. Future civilizations rediscover knowledge, believing themselves to be innovators, when in fact they may only be remembering what was once lost. Fire, agriculture, metalworking, astronomy. How many times were these reinvented, each time believed to be the first? Could it be that our own breakthroughs in science and technology are less original than we think? That we are walking paths already carved by civilizations long gone? The idea may sound unsettling, but it also makes sense. After all, if we were erased tomorrow, it's likely that a new species or even a new humanity would eventually rediscover electricity, engines, and flight. Not as invention, but as inevitability. This cycle doesn't just apply to civilizations, it applies to the Earth itself. The planet has been through extinction after extinction, resetting the biological clock each time. The Permian extinction wiped out nearly all life. The asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs gave mammals their chance. The Ice Ages sculpted landscapes and forced migration. In each case, destruction paved the way for renewal. Civilizations, too, may be caught in this larger cycle, rising during calm periods, falling when catastrophe strikes, and rising again when conditions allow. So where does this leave us? If the cycle is real, then our current civilization is not the first, nor will it be the last. We may believe we've broken the pattern with our technology, but we're just as vulnerable as those who came before. We are still at the mercy of nature, still prone to overreach, still capable of collapse. And if history is any guide, collapse is not just possible, it's inevitable. The only question is when. But perhaps there's another possibility, that the cycle itself holds a lesson. Maybe the reason civilizations rise and fall is to teach survival through humility. Each time, the survivors carry forward fragments of knowledge, enough to start again. Maybe humanity is meant to climb the spiral of civilization, not in a straight line, but in loops, rising higher each time even as we repeat the pattern. Maybe what we see as collapse is really a form of rebirth, part of a process bigger than any one culture, bigger even than humanity itself. And if that's true, then the cycle of civilizations is not just a warning, it's a promise that even if we fall, something will rise again, a promise that the story never ends, it only transforms. But it's also a challenge. Will we be content to follow the cycle blindly, repeating the mistakes of those before us? Or will we find a way to break it, to build something that endures, not just for centuries, but for as long as Earth itself allows? Because if we fail, we'll become just another forgotten chapter, another civilization erased, another mystery for the future to wonder about. And maybe, millions of years from now, someone else will stand where we are, looking back at us with the same question we now ask: were they really the first, or just the latest in a cycle that never truly ends? When we look back across everything we've uncovered, the strange anomalies, the erased histories, the suppressed discoveries, the endless cycle of civilizations, we're left with a chilling yet awe-inspiring truth. The Earth is far older, far more mysterious, and far less forgiving than we like to admit. Civilizations, no matter how advanced, are fragile flames flickering against the vast winds of time. They burn bright, they reshape the world around them, and then sooner or later they are extinguished. What remains is not their monuments or their machines, but questions whispered in myths, buried in stone, or etched faintly in the geological record. And those questions now echo louder than ever. If we accept that civilizations before us may have risen and fallen, then our own existence takes on an entirely new weight. We are not the first, and we will not be the last. Our skyscrapers, our satellites, our digital archives, all the things we believe, make us eternal, are nothing but temporary etchings on a canvas that is constantly being repainted. The Earth has no loyalty to memory. It erases, it reshapes, it renews. The silence of deep time does not mean nothing was there. It means that time itself has no patience for permanence. And if that is true, then we must confront the possibility that our future is not guaranteed. But within that realization lies an even deeper responsibility. If we are part of a cycle, then perhaps our greatest task is not to avoid collapse, because history shows collapse is almost inevitable, but to decide what survives after us, what knowledge, what wisdom, what values will endure when our skyscrapers crumble and our networks go dark. Will the next civilization, whether human or something else, look back and find only ruins? Or will they find guidance, messages, lessons etched deeply enough to survive the silence? There is also another possibility, one that unsettles and inspires in equal measure. Maybe the cycle is not random at all. Maybe it is a process, a kind of cosmic rhythm in which intelligence rises again and again, each time carrying the potential to climb higher. Perhaps we are not trapped in endless repetition, but on a spiral circling through collapse and rebirth, yet rising a little further with each turn. If so, then our task is clear: to push further than those who came before, to reach higher, and to leave behind something more lasting than fleeting power or monuments of stone. And yet, even with this hope, we must face the hardest truth of all. One day, whether through our own mistakes or the forces of nature, we will be forgotten. Our cities will vanish, our languages will fade, and our existence will become part of the silence of deep time. But perhaps that is not the tragedy we think it is. Perhaps the meaning of civilization is not in how long it lasts, but in the fact that it lived at all, that it dared to rise, to create, to wonder. And maybe that is what connects us to whatever came before, the act of reaching, of questioning, of refusing to be content with the unknown. So where does that leave us? Standing at the edge of time, staring into the vast mystery of the Earth's past and our uncertain future, we can choose to see ourselves as insignificant, a brief flicker destined to vanish, or we can choose to see ourselves as part of something greater, a lineage of civilizations, each one daring to challenge the silence, each one leaving behind a faint trace of curiosity, a spark of wonder, a glimpse of what intelligence can achieve. And maybe, just maybe, that is the true legacy we can hope for. Not permanence, not immortality, but a spark, one that even when our chapter ends, will ignite again somewhere, somewhen, in the endless cycles of Earth and beyond. Because in the end, the universe doesn't remember those who lasted the longest. It remembers those who dared to ask the biggest questions. And we, right now, are daring to ask, are we really the first or just the latest in a story that never ends?